Good morning. Welcome to the Data Lifecycle, everything from biz to viz and beyond, brought to you by Women in Analytics and Women in Big Data. Our featured speakers today are going to be Regan Avon, who's president of Women in Analytics. She's a principal consultant. She holds a bachelor's degree in industrial and system engineering from Ohio State. Then we're going to move on to a section on business understanding given by Anne-Marie Weber. Anne-Marie is both a Women in Big Data chapter lead and U.S. board member. She's director modeling of performance analytics at CUNA Mutual Group and holds degrees in economics. Then we're going to move on to Kelly Denny, who's Director Data Science and Clinical Analytics at Radiology Partners and also holds a PhD from Ohio State. We lastly will close out with Visualization and Insight Delivery by Divya Santhamurthy, Senior Data Analyst, REI Systems. She holds an MS in Computer Science, University of Houston, and then I'll be lastly giving some closing remarks as we move on here. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this series. Bytes and Insights is a free virtual series featuring panel discussions, fireside chats, technical webinars, and book chats with best-selling authors. And it's brought to you by Women in Analytics. You can join them every other Wednesday. All the events are free, accessible online, and open to all genders. And obviously, there's a code of conduct that everyone must abide by. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Women in Analytics. The mission of Women in Analytics is to increase visibility into the women making an impact in the analytics space and to provide a platform for women to lead the conversations around the advancements of analytical research, development, and application. Women in Analytics brand new membership platform launches Monday, May 18th. You can stay involved in the community through the events calendar, resource center, job board, and much more. Definitely you can follow them on hashtag WIA Bytes and Insights. Okay, a little bit about Women in Big Data. So our charter is to champion the success of women in data careers. And so that can be data engineers, can be visualization people, data scientists. We also cover the business side of that. So it could be people in marketing, sales, biz dev, and so forth. Definitely feel free to join, volunteer, partner, or sponsor us. We have sponsorship from Fortune 500 plus companies. We have sister organizations like Women in Analytics that we partner with. Obviously, it's all about you. And we have 16,000 plus members in 5 continents to date. The way to engage with us is to find a local chapter and meet up at womeninbigdata.org. You can follow us on Twitter at Data Women, Facebook Women in Big Data, Instagram at Women in Big Data Global, and we have a very active LinkedIn group at Women in Big Data Forum that I urge you to go ahead and join. All right, so a little bit about our agenda and topics today. We're going to be producing a technical webinar on the data lifecycle as kicked off by Regan and then followed by Anne-Marie, then Kelly and Divya. We'll cover everything from understanding data in a business context, the design and execution of modeling analysis, and the process of visualization and delivering insights. So after the presenters do their fantastic work, hopefully we'll have a bit of time for Q&A, and then I will provide a few closing remarks and share information about how to access the webinar. A little bit about webinar tips. Use side-by-side mode to view slides and session presenters. If you're having audio issues, definitely ping us at info@womeninanalytics.com. If you have a question, definitely go ahead and engage in the chat, and there may be some poll questions. Okay, so with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand this off to Reagan, who is going to talk a little bit about this webinar and then hand it off to our illustrious speakers.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Regina. Yeah, so I'm just going to do a quick overview of the life cycle, and each of our individual speakers are going to go into it in much more detail. But I figured it would just be good to show kind of the context of everything that we're going to be talking about today. So the data life cycle really starts with the business understanding and getting a grasp of the use case that you're designing a solution for. And then it goes into a design and explore phase where you're trying to understand feasibility of the solution and the available data you can use to solve those business challenges. Once you go through the design and exploration phase, then you go into the actual building of the solution. And the solution can be come in many different types. You could be building a model, you could be building a static report or an interactive dashboard, just all based off of the requirements that you extracted during the business understanding phase. After the solution is built, there's a whole phase around validation and then operationalizing that solution. So I'm going to go through each one of these individually, just as in a high level. So defining your business challenge, this is really interactive conversations with the business stakeholder, somebody who might be the subject matter expert. They have a particular challenge that data could solve for them. And so sitting down and extracting those requirements, understanding the true problem they're trying to solve, and also the urgency of that business challenge. Prioritization of these initiatives is extremely important. And so just being able to extract what exactly it's tied to, which line of business, and how does the leadership team see that as a priority, and just making sure that you have full context of that. The next part would be really looking for existing reports or existing solutions in the organization. A huge challenge can be, some of these stakeholders not being able to find the individual report or solution that exists out there. So looking for what's kind of already established across the organization is a good thing to do. And then, of course, identifying the audience. So who's going to be using this report or this data table or this dashboard, and what kind of decisions are they going to be making from it? So it's really important to also understand the business process that this is going to be kind of inserted into. So if it's, a dashboard, does it make sense to make it into an interactive dashboard? Will they be logging into it every day to make a decision? Is it something they just want to see weekly or monthly? And that will really drive what kind of information you want to display. And again, identifying these key decisions, business metrics, and most importantly, impact metrics. So how do you know if this solution is truly going to solve the business problem itself? In the design and exploration phase, again, calculating these key metrics and verifying them with standards across the organization, exploring the data and related data and data sources, documenting potential quality issues and concerns and reviewing those consistently with the stakeholders, generating initial design and reviewing that with the stakeholders as well, and then understanding the solution feasibility overall, because some solutions may not be feasible with the way that the organization is currently storing and tracking certain data sources. Next, into the build process, you'll want to, once you get approvals on yes, this solution's feasible and the business buys in, you'll want to start building out that process and do this iteratively, consistently reviewing different versions of your solution with stakeholders as well, and scheduling sessions to discuss design updates. And then, of course, you'll want to build out a monitoring capability to make sure that the solution is accurate over time and actually fits the requirements and the needs of the business. And then finally, validation and operationalizing it. So it's not enough to build a model. It's not enough to build a dashboard. It has to be actually used and integrated into the system. And whether that's in an automated fashion, so you're connecting it to an application, or again, it's just a public display of a dashboard, and letting your stakeholders know where that sits and how to find it and how to make requests to make updates to it. These types of data products, whether it's a model or a dashboard, will continue to live consistently over time, and you'll have to make updates and change it dynamically as the business changes as well. So just continuing to test and monitor and understand the business impact that solution had will be immensely, valuable for both the stakeholders and then those that are involved in actually building the solution. So with that, I'm going to pass things over to Anne-Marie, and she's going to dive into the first part of this life cycle.
Thank you. Good morning to those who are in the morning like me, and good afternoon to those who have started your afternoon. Let me go in here. So I wanted to share my experience a little bit about how business understanding and needs can be very different from research needs. So I've worked both in research groups and in business groups. And when you're in a research groups, it's all about furthering the science of analytics, right? New tools and techniques, figuring out new ways to be able to analyze the data, organize the data. It's really primarily focused on the tech. Whereas business understanding, it's less focused on really pushing that tech space forward and more about ensuring that there are strategic financial value being added. And so I wanted to chat a little bit today about what that means and how to find it. Now my slides aren't going. There we go. So why are we doing this? As I said before, it's not just about the model. When we're in the business space, it isn't just whether or not a specific model works. It's not whether or not a model or a data solution has, for example, an effective AUC, right? Or if the R squared is really high. You have to really evaluate the end-to-end solution, right? So, and the cost of that end-to-end solution, what that takes to implement the models within, whether it's a website or some sort of background system, what actions are taken and whether or not those actions are valuable. So I've worked in a lot of data science groups that end up having a really large graveyard for their projects that don't get implemented. And I think that's largely because they've been focused mostly on the model and whether or not they can find data and create a model and have it be effective, and less so on whether or not that end-to-end solution is effective. So I've sat in many meetings where the data scientist says the model works and the business leader says the model doesn't work, and they're both actually right. So how can we prevent this from happening? I think a lot of it has to do with really truly understanding the business model for the company that you're at, as well as the business strategy and sort of understanding where they're going within that business model. To help understand this, I'm using a framework called the Business Model Canvas. An example here is Netflix. So if you haven't seen this before, it's a really great, quick way of getting a business model on one page to be able to show how a company makes money. Who is it making money from? Who are their potential partners and how to make money? Their various revenue streams, key activities. Netflix, as it started out, was a very different company than it is today. It just gave us DVDs through the mail. But they knew that the environment was changing. So the business model is sort of a snapshot. The business strategy says, where do we want to go with our business? And that's really conditional on the environment that they're in. So which of these boxes are changing, right? Technology was really changing at this time. The original streaming services from ABC and NBC, you would frequently have to restart the whole thing. They were just terrible. They would crash. But the technology was starting to become good enough and consistent enough that regular streaming was something that customers were getting to demand. So they knew that they were going to be changing their business model. So the strategy allowed them to move into the business model that they have today, which is a lot more complex. They still have their rental DVD system, although most of their customers are on their streaming platform. And so the strategy said, here are the areas that we want to move into, and here's how we're going to do it with the various resources available to us. And so if you understand how your company makes money and the ways that they want to evolve and change over time, you can make sure that you're aligning your projects to those priorities that the company has. And you'll have a lot more likelihood of getting resources and having successful implementations. So when we think about a specific use case, especially in the data science realm, I feel like it's always something that's constantly evolving as we learn more about the data and the processes and systems. So I do feel like it's something that's constantly changing, but I do think it's really important, even more important than to ensure that proper and good communication about what we're actually doing is going on. And that really needs to happen from the beginning. So just like a business model canvas, I really like the AI canvas that Prediction Machines talks about. By the way, if you haven't read this book, it's a great book. I really enjoy it. It's also a great recommendation for business leaders to understand artificial intelligence. There is a technical version of it, but the original book is very non-techy. It has this great AI canvas in it. Essentially, I tell business leaders to take a look at the top row. If you had the perfect prediction, what would you do with it? And if you can't answer that question, we're kind of at a no-go point. It doesn't matter whether or not we have data and can have a whole team of data scientists. We have to know what we're going to be doing with that prediction. What actions will we be taking, and how will we measure success? I also like leveraging a one-pager. This helps to give people a 30-second impression of what a project is. And if they can't understand what you're doing in 30 seconds, most leaders will probably start tuning out and doing something else. And so this gives a high-level way of being able to focus most on those actions, as well as why we're here, what we're actually going to be trying out, and how we're going to be doing it. And I'd say keep the technical piece as non-technical as possible, right? Especially if this is for a business leader. This is also something that I see that evolves and changes as the project progresses, because you learn something new, the data tells you something different, and you just keep tweaking. And you tell people from the beginning, this is a living document, but this will be your sort of reference for what we're actually doing. My way of sort of cheating my way into graphic design is I make these in PowerPoint, and I change the slide dimensions to 8.5 by 11 so that I can export it to a PDF and make it look like it's some sort of fancy internal marketing document. So now you know how I'll cheat doing that. So this is a great way of being able to house that information that you've learned. When I go around, I'll have this in hand, and I guess the olden days when we used to actually go to offices, and I would say, here's what we're doing here, and tell me what I have wrong, right? Like, I've only been on this project for a little while, tell me what I have wrong, and then the next time we chat, I'll have incorporated it into the one pager, and then they'll feel like they have buy-in and people have listened to them and all that sort of good stuff. Another thing that I do is I create a really rough workflow. This is in no way any sort of fancy architecture. I'm not a data architect, but this is a great way to communicate with both business leaders and IT groups about what we're doing and when, because if we don't know when we're doing it, we don't know what data is available. This is obviously a very simple workflow, but I've made very complicated ones. And in cases where you're working with multiple IT groups, I had one project that required 3 different IT groups, and then one of the IT groups was at the beginning and the end of the process. So there were so many handoffs, and being able to lay this all out, and then I literally had just wide swaths of translucent color that said, here's IT group A and B and C, and then we could talk about what each one needed for those handoffs within their own sort of requirements documentation. And this was very helpful for that, those discussions. As you get towards implementation, it's really important to continue to learn and evolve through piloting and testing and experimentation. The first is to really understand your customers really well. It's important to be able to find ways to be able to interview customers, whether they be internal or external, one-on-one. It's amazing what you can find out by spending 15 minutes with a person and just asking leading questions to be able to find out what problems they have. It's important to incorporate experiments, not necessarily with the purpose of proving what you want, but with the purpose of learning. So I've worked on multiple projects where we've set up these experiments where we're testing out different things to be able to see either how customers will react, will they say yes, will they get angry, how will they feel about it, those sorts of things. So you're being really clear up front what the experiment is trying to find, and a lot of times I'll set guardrails at the beginning to say, here's what we consider success, here's what we would need to go back and experiment again, and here's what we would need to go back to the drawing board on. And so finally, if you're able to pilot with a small group of users, it's important to select early adopters, watch them use the product if you can, and modify any sort of use cases, reporting, or communication, and to pivot if necessary. So I will hand it back to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Anne-Marie. We're going to move from the business understanding piece to Dr. Kelly Denny, who's going to talk about some of the execution side from the data scientist perspective.
Okay, so then the idea, right, is keeping that idea and what your value proposition is really in focus when you are doing your projects and setting them up and that kind of thing. Because as data scientists, we have a lot of creativity, and certainly on my team, you know, we're always interested in the newest thing that we discover, or we want to go down rabbit holes and think about, you know, what it is that we could do with the data that we have. So on my team, we talk about having squirrels. So from the dog in the movie Up that gets distracted by, you know, the newest shiny thing. And so as a leader, it's really important to keep that business question in mind and keep, you know, what your team is trying to do to support the business in mind as you're executing projects. Next, the big question is, of course, is data available or accessible to support those business requirements? So it may seem obvious that, you know, we can't do analytics or modeling without data. But it's amazing to me, some stakeholders that don't really understand what data scientists do and are capable of doing. And I've actually had a stakeholder come to me before with a project idea, and I had to tell them, I'm sorry, that would be wonderful if we could support that, but we don't have the data to support and be able to help with that project. And their response was very puzzling and looked at me and they're like, well, can't you just, you know, do data science, like sprinkle a little data science on it? And that's not the point, right? If we don't actually have data to support the business question, then it's really not possible. So thinking about, is that data available to you is really important when you start to look at the business requirements that you are trying to support. Next, where is that data? Right, accessible and usefully accessible are two different things. If you're dealing with a data lake, for example, with a whole lot of unstructured data that's dirty and, you know, it's incomplete, you may not know what's there, then sure, you have access to, quote, data, and maybe some of that data is something that could help you with your business problem. But if it's not usefully accessible, and particularly if you have deadlines or business requests that have quick turnaround and the data are not usefully accessible to support that case, then it's really important to understand that and to communicate that back with your stakeholders. The next thing is it clean and usable. So, you know, even if you think that data is there, you know, how structured do you need it? How much cleaning and preparation and are you and your team going to have to do with that data before you can actually use it? Do you know the provenance? Do you even understand what the data is that you're looking at? Can, you know, other biases that you may not understand because they were created upstream of where you have access to the data actually impeding your ability to be successful? So spending a lot of time just with the data, understanding the data, is an incredibly important part of being successful with your analytics and your modeling. Finally, whose role is it to make some of these happen, some of these things happen with the data? Is it fully the data science team job? it's certainly a very fine line between IT and data science. And so in order to get the data that you need and have it in a way that it's useful for your team to be successful, really a strong collaboration is super important. So, talk with IT, understand roles within your business. Do you have a data warehouse or an ETL team that's actually responsible for preparing the data for your use case? Is your data science team actually have access to all of the data in the raw state, and you're in charge of creating the type of data and the usefulness of the data from that raw state? And all of these things take time. And so again, like understanding whose role is what and making sure your stakeholders understand that and the amount of time it's going to take to get the data ready for you to actually do analytics or do modeling on that data is really, really important, because stakeholders, they don't necessarily understand that data scientists can spend 80% of our time just preparing the data for modeling, that if that time isn't built into the project plan, then you're setting yourself up for failure. Next, how do you actually translate the business requirements into analytics requirements? So what are your key performance indicators that the business is interested in? Are they performance metrics? Are they utilization metrics? Are you trying to create your own profit and loss type of calculations? Or do you need to predict and estimate for your stakeholders the return on their investment of creating a modeling solution in some way? And, these things are driven by the business requirement. Are you given a budget to work within? Things like how long are you going to take to do this project? What's it going to roll out? Being able to predict these things are very important from a data science leadership perspective, because that's always the question, right? The business is interested in something. Our team actually has a great allowance here. We have incredible support from our leadership. And again, our value proposition is value. And so it's value in patient care. And so you can't exactly put a number on that. So we're not dealing directly with profit and loss, because we have a lot of more kind of intangible, but also very valuable outcomes with our team. But, some projects may not have that luxury and do have to be able to balance their own checkbook, as it were, for how much time is going to be spent doing the modeling versus what the business expects to get back. Next, if you're actually doing machine learning and AI, where do you stop on the ROC curve? Right? So there's a trade-off between false positives and false negatives, and, how you build your model, the size of your training sets, how many variables you fit, all these different things are going to place you different places on this curve. And it may be the business requirements that are actually setting what this needs to be, or maybe it even needs to be tunable by the users themselves. So we build AI software that's actually for clinical use by radiologists. And so there's definitely a trade-off here that we need to look at, because our radiologists don't want to be getting alerts constantly with a lot of false positives that come up while they're practicing medicine. And so we need to be very cognizant about the number of false positives. But at the same time, if we have false negatives, that means that there's actually clinical cases that are impactful to a patient that may slip through the cracks of our AI software. And so it's a very delicate balance, but where you are on this curve could be very, very dependent on your business case. And so it's important to get understanding from your stakeholders as well, and make sure and be able to explain the technical sides of this and to your stakeholders who may not be as technical in a very clear way, so that they understand what they're getting in the end. All right, once you have these requirements, now you're actually looking at completing the analysis of your data. So one of the ways that you need to look at this is, what is your development methodology, right? Are you agile? Are you going to have, short sprints of work and have a lot of iterative development and then go back and see, where we are for that short time? Is the project built in such a way that it has to be waterfall? It is well defined from start to finish, and you just move through really in a straight line from the beginning to the end. That's very difficult in data science. And so this is another way where communication with the business side is really very important, because I think a lot of businesses still expect waterfall. They want to know what it's going to take from beginning to end, how long, how many people, what are they going to get? And it's very difficult to do that in data science. A lot of it is still truly scientific. It's iterative. You have a hypothesis, you build a model, you have to test it. It may not give you exactly what you want, and you have to go back and try again. And so being able to explain this process and communicate it and keep your stakeholders well apprised of where you are in your project is also incredibly important. And so I'm just going to go into, 3 more kind of strategic questions or considerations around this. So one of them is, how good is good enough? Anne-Marie talked a little bit about research being very different than, data science and analytics and the business side. And this is one of those areas that it's very hard for many of us who came into data science in the business world from research, because defining that line between good and good enough is very hard. The researcher, they want the perfect answer. They want to explain everything. They want to know exactly how things work. And they have time and ability to go down those different avenues. But on the business side, we don't necessarily have that luxury. Again, we need to define this from the business requirements. This is something that needs to come out. What is the accuracy that you need to get? What is the, again, that where are you on your ROC curve? Have your business stakeholders be able to define for the team what the expectations are, so that when you've met those expectations or when you need to push a little bit farther, but you're never going to get all the way. Next, how long will it take? This is an incredibly difficult question, and it is one of the favorite things that business leadership wants to ask and know from our team. How long is this going to take? Science is iterative. Data science is really a type of science. And it is really, really hard for us to answer this question, because we don't know how long it's going to take. We can give a pretty good estimate on how long it's going to take to get to around a 70 or 80% accuracy in our machine learning models. But again, we're working in the clinical space. So our accuracy before we can actually roll something out and deploy it is 95%. And there are so many variables for defining how long it's going to take to get from 80 to 95%. And so here it's really important to think, again, communication is very, very important. And, think about the things that you can define. So maybe I don't know how long it's going to take, but I can talk about things like, how complex is the problem I'm trying to deal with? Maybe bring it back to a past project that you've done and have a comparison. Well, this project is kind of like the project we did last year, and it took us about this long. I can't guarantee it'll be the same this time, but at least it gives you a, kind of on a scale of 1 to 5, is it simple or is it really complex? How many variables are you dealing with? How many, moving pieces do you have to build in order for the solution to be complete? So there are definitely ways that you can discuss maybe not direct indicators of length of time for a project, but at least indirect corollaries with things that could take a long time that you can communicate with. Also set up touch bases, touch points, have kind of a roadmap that lays out the tasks that need to be completed. So at least they have an idea of where you are from beginning to end, even if you don't know exactly how long each component will take. The next thing is, again, just properly managing expectations. A lot of people still don't understand in the business world that machine learning is not 100% accurate. So when they run into problems, so much of it is statistical. And so you can't pinpoint exactly why something didn't work one way. And you have to manage your users' expectations that it's not going to be perfect. And try phased approaches with projects, and just really, maybe you can roll out some of the easier stuff so that they can see some improvement, but then take another phase to do something hard so that they can see results as they're coming in, and there's not a huge long period of time where the stakeholders have no idea what your team is doing. Next are ethical or regulatory requirements or restrictions, something you need to think about. In healthcare, we certainly do. We are worried about patient data, so we have HIPAA regulations that we have to worry about, even data ownership. And this gets into one of the things about data science and a data science Hippocratic oath. It's not officially out there, but it's kind of, we have a lot of power working with data. And so we really need to ask ourselves, just because we can do something doesn't mean we should do something with the data, right? There are unintended consequences. There are biases that impact our results, that if they get out into the business and you've deployed something and then all of a sudden you find out that there is a huge bias in your data after you've already promised your stakeholders that, you know, your model is good, that can be a huge problem. So, you know, as a leader of a data science team, it's your job to think through all of these things, make sure that you're not crossing any boundaries that you shouldn't be crossing, making sure that everything that you're doing as a team is really thought about ethically and from a standpoint of who might this impact and how, and what considerations do I need to make before I tell my stakeholders that a model is ready to go. Have I thought about every possible thing I could that my model may have in terms of unintended consequences or variables, or, you know, things that I didn't think about that may not be directly into the data, but maybe, again, that part of that data provenance. If I don't know something about how the data got there and there's something that then impacts our results, who's responsible for that, right? Who's accountable? And just making sure that your team is really thoughtful when it comes to all of these issues. Finally, handoffs, right? Our team is building analytics and we're building results, but where do those results go? And so Divya is going to talk about next the, you know, visualizations and the end users, but from the analysis side, you have to think about that too, right? So this is, again, communicating with those teams that you're going to make your handoffs to are really important. You know, if you're building, you know, a backend model that sends an API response, but then the, you know, product or dashboard or whatever that is accepting that response doesn't communicate well, or you change it and you forget to tell the person who's going to be using it, things break downstream when you don't communicate changes that you may make. Or maybe you haven't thought about your results well enough and there's KPIs that the business wants to be measured and dashboarded, and you forget to present that as a results in your table, output table. Finally, if you are doing machine learning, you need a feedback loop, right? You need to have, you know, iterative measurements on how well your model is doing in the wild, right? Testing and training data, we obviously make them as good as we can, but it's never the same once you actually deploy something and you have brand new data. So how did you design that feedback loop? You know, did you think about how you're going to get your results back? Did you talk to your stakeholders about the maintenance of that product that also needs to be budgeted in? Like, when you're done, you're not done, right? You need to, if a model is going to continue to be valuable into the future, you need to understand how you're going to maintain that model. So it's not a single life cycle as a traditional, you know, IT solution or a single analytical solution might be. You need to have the ability and the resources basically built in to go back and revisit it over time. So thinking about how you're going to do all of these handoffs in your project plan are going to be important to make sure that you're successful as well. So I will leave it there. Again, communication is the key. You know, these business systems are very complex now with a number of teams that are you know, interacting and participating in a given project. And so I just can't emphasize that enough, how important it is to make sure everybody's on the same page. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kelly. And speaking of communication, Divya is going to be talking about how to communicate results and visualize information. So Divya, I will let you take it from here.
Hello, everyone. Firstly, can you all hear me okay, and can you see my screen?
Yes, I can hear you and see you. It's a little crackly on the audio.
Okay. How about now? Any better?
It's still the same, but I can hear you okay.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. And I'll be speaking about visualization and insight delivery. Firstly, to begin with, data visualization is equal parts art as it is science. Now, which comes first is more of a chicken and egg situation, but I'm pretty sure that you all would agree that it's a blend of both. Now, during the initial years of my career, like about 7 years ago, I remember being in a room with my fellow team members who were data savvy and also folks from business like sales coaches and sales managers, and I was presenting my analysis on sales data. Now, while I was doing it, all I would see is a nod from my team members. And as I wrapped up the presentation, I had this eye-opener kind of a question asking, what does this mean to me and my team? It was actually a sales coach asking what my analysis meant to him and his team. Now, this question, did it mean that something was wrong with my numbers? Not really. It simply meant that what I saw through my numbers wasn't the same as of my audience. When the sales coach said, what does this mean to me? It was more of, what are the story you're trying to convey and what are the takeaways from the numbers you're showing me? Now, thanks to that question, it really helped me change my approach on how I would analyze data and also visualize it. Now, analyzing the data, the science is, once after you're done with the science part, taking those numbers and conveying a story that would assist business or the end users in their decision-making process is both an art and a science. Now, the focus here or the goal should be to deliver a product that's simple, comprehensible, credible, and meaningful. So before I get into the details of how do we do it and the focus areas, let me show you some key considerations on what you'll have to do as a visualization developer. Firstly, we have to learn to ask the right questions. Now, there are so many tools in the market on how to visualize data, so I'm not going to go into the details of choosing the right tool, because it really comes down to your expertise with a specific tool, or it could be a tool that your company is required to use, or even the needs of the project, as in, is it enough if I produce a simple dashboard, or should it come with an interactive capability, or should there be like a self-service element to it? So for the purpose of the discussion, let's assume that we have the right tool, and let's talk about the research. Now, this research is to gain and understand the data you'll be working with. So to begin with, the first question should be, who is my audience? Now, unless you understand who your audience is, it's going to be super hard for you to develop a visualization that's going to be meaningful to them. Now, the second question would be, what do I have, as in what data do I have, and what else would I need? Now, if you're doubling the role of both a data analyst and a visualization developer, this would be an easier question to ask. If not, you need to get in touch with individuals behind the numbers to understand what they actually mean and if they match with the user requirements. If not, what are the missing data points and how you would go about acquiring them. Thirdly, what do I show? Now, it's not about what you want to show. It's, again, user-centric, as in what are the data points that I have to put on the visualization in order for it to convey a message to my end users. Now, finally, how do I want to show it? As in the representation part, should I go with a bar chart? Should I go with a Gantt chart? Should I go with a pie chart? Again, this is user-centric, and it's very much dependent on the comfort level of the end users, as in, would they be able to interpret an advanced visual? Or if not, should you look into alternative approaches that are rather simplistic? I call this exercise an exercise of W's and H's, because it's all about what, where, how, and who. And depending on where you are in your journey as a visualization developer, you may have to add to this list. Importance of collaboration. So data analysis cannot be performed in isolation, and dashboarding is no exception. Firstly, you'll have to include your end users in the design process. It's a key to deliver a successful solution. From my experience, the best conversations happen if you have a mock-up dashboard in place with your initial understanding of the user requirements and the data, rather than huddling in a room with your end users and saying, okay, what do you want to see on the dashboard? So create a sample dashboard, put it in front of your end users, and ask them questions like, would this serve your day-to-day data needs? If not, what else would make it efficient? Secondly, if there, we spoke about this previously, if you identify any gaps in your understanding of be it business or the data, get in touch with individuals who can help deepen your understanding. And thirdly, once after you have a design of the visualization you want to deliver, try and team up with user experience experts to see if they have any advice for you. And finally, the best way to refine your visualization is to conduct peer reviews, as in get in the room with your fellow team members, show them the product you have designed or even developed, give them a minimal background of what you're trying to achieve, and ask them to review it. Basically, what you're doing here is trying to see someone other than you, the person who developed it, is able to interpret the message that's being conveyed by the dashboard. And trust me, the experience that you gain out of this exercise is beyond what you would read in the books. Finally, now that we have seen the key considerations, let's talk about the focus areas. On an average, it only takes 5 seconds for a person to judge if they like what they see and if they want to explore further. Now, if it only takes 5 seconds, then what should be the focus areas that you need to look into in order to develop a dashboard or a visualization that's simple, comprehensible, credible, and meaningful? So to begin with, design your dashboard layout or your visualization layout. Now, the key here is to have the most important data points or the top stories in the top part of the page, and that should be followed by the supporting information, be it like summary cards or profit percentages, loss values, anything that's important needs to sit on the top part of the dashboard. And the following section should be the supporting information. Secondly, organize the visualizations based on the logical flow of questions a user may ask as they navigate through the dashboard. Thirdly, there is this whole science around calibrating color, size, position, grouping. So invest some time on understanding the neuroscience behind how visual system works, because it's going to help you in creating compelling data stories. Less means more. Do not crowd your dashboard. Keep it simple, maybe limited to a maximum of 6 to 8 graphs. Device-friendly designs. You need to factor in the devices on which your end users would be viewing these dashboards, because the product you develop has to be responsive on all these devices. So once after you design the layout, the next step would be to choose the right charts. And again, the focus here has to be on the audience. It's not about what the tool can do or what you can do with the tool, but it's more about what your audience can understand. Think about a situation where you create a box plot and then you place it in front of an audience who has never seen this before. You're kind of defeating the purpose of the visualization, because as soon as the audience looks at the visualization, their first question would be, what am I looking at? So make sure you're choosing the right charts from the user's standpoint. Thirdly, providing context is a key area. Again, don't make your dashboard all about numbers. Suggest text that show an action, and also include descriptions and tooltips that would help with assisting and interpreting the numbers. Now, you might come back to me saying, okay, Divya, I want to create a simple dashboard, but I have too many data points, which when put together would be a beautiful story. Sure, how about considering a way to create a dashboard where you would reveal the information as the user goes through it? An example would be adding data points and even charts on tooltips rather than crowding the main page or the main dashboard with all the information that you have at hand. Also consider creating role-based dashboards. That way you're showing and hiding information based on who logs in. Another great way is to highlight what's important. That way, even a data-heavy dashboard would still grab the user's attention on what data points they need to focus on. Being consistent. Firstly, make sure that your visualization has labels, legends, and filters, because it's going to help with making the dashboard or the visualization interactive and intriguing. And secondly, keep it consistent. Say, for example, you have two statuses, incomplete and completed. You cannot color incomplete in green and completed in orange on the first graph and then switch it to maybe red and blue on the next one. All it does is it's going to lead to confusion. A food for thought for someone creating visualizations is to set up standards and best practices. There are so many tools out there that would let you create templates, as in you can program in the colors, fonts, size, position of all the elements that you would be using on the dashboard. So creating a template and reusing them would actually save you time. And the saved time could be used in other critical elements like creating the visualization and also data validation. Lastly, but most importantly, make sure that your product is inclusive and accessible, as in, this again ties back to your end users. So when you show the product, you'll actually get to know how the product is being interpreted by users from different backgrounds. Now, make sure your product is also accessible, as in it supports interactivity by an end user who's differently abled. Finally, as I close my part of the discussion here, I want to share with you all my mantra. Similar to how we say a picture is worth 1,000 words, I believe that a dashboard is worth 1,000,000 data points, but showing the stories based on these data points is up to us, the ones who develop them. So let's ensure we create the right stories. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Divya. I'm going to have Regina start sharing her screen and close us out.
Okay, hi there. There was a question which we may not have time to address, but let me share my screen. Apologies for that. All right. Okay, so thank you, Reagan, Anne-Marie, Kelly, and Divya for absolutely fantastic presentation. Okay, so where are we going to find the recording from today? Those that registered through Eventbrite will be sent up a follow-up email with a link. It'll also be posted on womeninbigdata.org. It'll take us about a week. It'll be part of a blog that Anne-Marie kindly is going to put together that will also include the presentation material if the presenters are comfortable with sharing their material. And also the recording can be found on womeninanalytics.com. Up next for Women in Analytics, they're also doing a co-event with Witty, and it's a book discussion about how to build a career in data science. Also, there'll be more events with women in big data, so definitely join the meetup, and then check us out, the Women in Big Data Forum on LinkedIn, plus our website. And we're going to be doing a career event in July, and there'll also be an event, I think it's in July, on how to negotiate a compensation package. As mentioned, Women in Big Data does both business and technical kinds of events. So with that, I'm done presenting.
And we're about to hit the top of the hour, so I'm just going to close out again. Thank you everyone for attending today. As Regina noted, we have another event coming up in 2 weeks. The link for the book is also on our website as well. We'll send information in a follow-up email about that. So thank you again so much for attending today, sticking with us throughout your lunch or in the morning if you're in another time zone. And we will see you in a couple of weeks.